Hello and welcome to Europa Universalis 4. I am Lord Forwind, here with a guide on how to play a Native American empire. So by this, of course, I'm meaning North and South Americans and Central Americans. Not going to go into the specific strategies of the Aztec or the Inca miners. That's for another time. Essentially, this is a brief guide on how to survive the Europeans. I'll hit upon three roughly different strategies, and then if you want to see an Aztec or Inca one, I'll go into depth with those on a different video. So if you start up in the North American region, not including these, which is debatable if they're North or Central America, you start off with some pretty interesting stuff. You start off, if you're a one province miner, like Powhatan here, you start off with some unique mechanics that allow you to migrate and pick up monarch points. You want to do that pretty often to gain a large amount of them. If you start as a more settled nation, like the Cree or Cherokee, you've got a couple different options. I'll just quickly jump into the Cherokee here to give you a brief rundown of what to do, and then we'll go back to an overall view of the basic strategy. So once this loads, sorry about this. The biggest strategy for this is to grow large, and you start off with very different buildings than most of the rest of the world. You also start off with a native idea tree pretty much. It's kind of like these idea trees, but in some ways more and in other ways less useful. Essentially, for 500 monarch points, you can do it in admin, diplomatic, or military. You can unlock some of these. They're actually pretty good. The issue is this ending one, the 15 per sheep per tech costs. You really don't want to take it until the end, because you're already at a 50% tech penalty, and it's only going to grow worse as the institutions pass. But the big one I find you want to focus on, or the big 2 or 3 ideally, you want to pick up the national tax modifier. That is immensely useful, especially because you've got unique buildings which give you like a bonus +1 tax income or plus 50% tax income. This allows you to actually be able to afford the next step in the plan to grow large. You want to get colonists. This is the clan migrations. It allows you to colonize. Of course, you want to set your native policy. If you do it, you probably want to set it to native repression policy. You'll deal with revolts, but the increased settling speed is definitely needed, because you're not going to get any tech really to give you any bonus. None of these other ones are that useful. If you're a single province Native American, you want to pick up the travois. It will decrease the migration cooldown timer, which is useful, because if you can migrate, you'll get some monarch points. It's a big boost. I tend not to play single province North Americans just because of how hard it is to start as them. I think this also, I could be entirely wrong, but I believe this does also apply to the single province tribes in South America, not the Inca, Aztec, or the Maya. Aztec's a bit off, but that region. The Nahuatl nations, the Maya and the Inca. So once you get the colonist and other stuff, the one you want to pick up from native military ideas that's really useful is this native land force limit modifier to boost the amount of troops you can have. The morale is pretty useful as well. You want to try and get a small little federation going. If you start as a larger nation, it's a lot easier. Let me see, where is that? Invite to federation. If you do get a federation, you want to pick up smoke ceremonies. But once you get the colonists and you get a basic amount of income coming in, you want to start settling. Ideally, you want to try and settle higher development provinces, which are mostly located on rivers and stuff. So centers of trade like Chesapeake, or actually that's not a center of trade, that's just an estuary. You can try getting control of one of the trade nodes, but not immensely useful. The other thing to remember is you're not able to fabricate your normal claims. In fact, it says natives cannot fabricate claims, which means if you're going to conquer anybody with wars, you're going to need missions to do so. Which, if you play as like the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, or the Cree, or even the Shawnee, you'll sometimes get missions to conquer other ones. The Huron and the Iroquois tend to really go at it, I found, which they kind of did historically too. And if you can, you want to take all their lands. You could vassalize them too. I tend to find taking all their land is usually a better move because most of the Native Americans are not that bright with their native ideas and won't actually colonize, which means you can grow rather quickly. Now, there's two approaches towards expansion as a Native American. Some people would argue you want to try and settle the coastline so that the Europeans cannot get a colony next to you and thereby declare war, or if they try and land, you've already controlled the coast. I kind of disagree with that to some degree, because in order to reform your government, first of all, you have to get all these ideas, which you will by the time the Europeans arrive and really settle, but you also need the neighbor having a core province and having some institutions, which means they really kind of need a colony. One way to do it, if you settle the coastline. I'm assuming you know how to settle and expand from there. It's pretty self-explanatory. I'll just quick run down. Lower army maintenance, fire all advisors. You can develop provinces, which can be really useful. If you've got, of course, the DLC that allows this, you can boost your tax income. If you try and settle, going back to colonization things, if you try and settle the coastline, you can do so, however, you're starting to face the issue that if the Europeans attack, they'll demand your entire coastline. So the best one I find, if you settle the coastline, is a European power declares war on you, or you sell them a province. I think you can sell provinces. Let me just double check that now that I think about that. I don't know if they've changed that. You actually can sell provinces. Okay. You can try and sell them a province, which is a legitimate strategy, or if they declare war on you, I find the best strategy is sue for peace immediately. Like 99% of the time, the best strategy I found is to sue for peace immediately. If you sue for peace immediately, most of the Europeans will only take like one, maybe two provinces, whereas if they actually attack you and get war score, they'll demand more. The odds are you're not going to grow big enough to take on any of the European powers, especially now that you really do need an advanced European neighbor. I guess you could try and hop skip your jump way down here and stuff, or you could even try and get a exploration ideas and try and actually explore. But considering natives can't build ships, you're really just limited to the coastline. Plus, you can see all of North America anyway. But that would work if they actually settled down in Central America, or if in South America. Actually, South America, legitimate strategy is to move near them because Portugal and Spain tend to get there early on before they're that aggressive towards Native Americans. So that's a pretty good strategy. The other colonization strategy is you put a single province on the coast. This usually works because the Europeans can't see into the coast, and the AI doesn't tend to demand land that it can't see. So in that case, if they do declare war, all they can take is one or two provinces. They won't take your entire empire. Once you do that, obviously you want to catch up in tech. But once you catch up in tech, reformed your government and all that, you're going to get you're going to catch up in tech roughly at the point at which the European nation was at tech level, if that makes sense. You're going to catch up to them in tech. So if you're going to reform your government, you ideally want to pick it after they've just gotten an institution and stuff. That way you have less of a tech penalty. Because otherwise, even if you catch up in tech, they'll get ahead of you again as you try and get all the institutions and everything passed. So just think about it. If they're about to embrace an institution, don't do it until they do embrace the institution. Then take the land. Then take the reformed government. Once you reform, you pretty much the number one strategy is you take expansion ideas followed by exploration ideas, assuming you haven't gotten to either of these before you reformed your government, which, depending on how things go, is possible. Reason being, expansion idea gives you a +10 global settler increase a little bit faster than exploration ideas. On the other hand, exploration ideas gives you more settlers, so you really want to hit both of those. Once you do that, the other one I find you want to hit is defensive ideas for the morale, but also for the attrition. Just makes it harder for Europeans to conquer you in general. You're not going to have really any forts, which is a problem. Quantity works, but you're never going to have enough money to really build to your force limit unless you've done amazingly well. But then you want to try colonizing as much as possible. You can go over your colonial limit, which is a sneaky way to do it, and then lower colonial maintenance a bit. I don't recommend it, though. It's usually better to focus on it completely. Once you reform, you'll get estates. And then, of course, you want to do the merchant estate that gives you, I think you still get it as a Europe Native American, like New World Charters or something. I could be wrong. I haven't done that in a while. But also you want to try and take any missions that say colonize land and stuff. Once you do reform, though, you will get the ability to put claims on other Native American provinces. So a very good strategy once you get to a coast is try and snake your way to kind of connecting territories. So like if you're the Cherokee, take the province here, so you border the Shawnees. That way once you can fabricate claims on them, you fabricate a claim, attack, take their land, and progress that way. If you do it right, or if you're really lucky, you can chain quite a few of the Native Americans and conquer them, because you're also going to have a massive tech lead, specifically morale. I tend to see the tipping point for Europeans attacking you and for when you can really wipe out anybody else is, if you notice under land morale here, improved by 1, level 15. I tend to find that if the Europeans hit that before you, they will attack you. That is pretty much the point, as all Native Americans they will attack you at. But once you've reformed and you've conquered some of your neighbors, you want to keep colonizing. At that point, once you've caught up in institutions, have an infrastructure going and somewhat of military, there's two things you want to do. First, you want to try and find any allies abroad. If you're lucky enough to be able to see a lot of Europe, tends to help if you're up in like North America or Eastern South America. You can sometimes get a rival like England, France, Spain, France, England, Portugal, if that happens. And if you can ally to them, that will help a lot. The other thing you want to try and do is you want to try and, at that point, take the coastline. You want to try and prevent colonial nations being set up if possible. That's one strategy. The other strategy is that you let them get the colonial nations set up. And if you do it right, sometimes you can oddly glitch it where you can attack. I know I'm saying glitch. I don't know if it's really a glitch. You can attack a colonial nation while their overlord won't really defend them. Usually I tend to find that works if a colonial nation has been formed after their parent nation has attacked you and gained a truce. The parent nation will have a truce with you, but the colonial nation won't. I don't know if they've fixed that since I last played it. That was about a couple months ago. But sometimes what you can do is you can declare on the colonial nation, take all their land, and their overlord won't really care. Another strategy is if you get large enough, you can start threatening the colonial nation for land, and their overlord won't interact at all. It's the weird mechanic of colonial nations having somewhat of their own diplomacy. It's a bit sneaky. Threatening for land, I find, tend to be one of the better strategies once you get large enough, because you can easily catch up to a moderately sized European power. Probably not Spain, but you can catch up to England and Portugal pretty easily and then threaten from there. But I do recommend trying to at least keep your capital away from the coastline as much as possible, because the AI will tend to prioritize taking your capital. But if you do it right, for example, as the Cherokee, which a lot of people like playing as their fairly solid nation overall, plus they have hostile core creation costs, which helps, because Europeans won't take much land. You can usually get control of most of the coastline here, and just in this area of development, you're really powerful. At some point, you want to attack the Europeans, and it's actually easier than you'd think fighting the Europeans than fighting off the Europeans. If the Europeans attack you, 99% of the time it means they have a fleet and an army they're willing to send over the New World to conquer you. And early on, there's almost no way you can resist that army. But once the initial war is over and you've caught up in tech, a lot of times you can declare war on them and they won't transport their army over. Now, couple caveats to that. Spain almost always has a navy capable of transporting its army over, so does England. But France and Portugal are particularly vulnerable to not having a strong enough navy to bring over an army that you can't beat. Portugal in particular is the easiest one to beat in a colonial war, which means if you're in South America, you're in luck because they tend to get Brazil. The issue, of course, is they're allied to Spain. So pick your poison, really. But once you've done that, you've caught up in tech, you kind of want to turtle for a little while. It sounds a bit strange, but the better infrastructure you build up, the better off you are. It might not seem you're that far behind in tech, but what you will be behind is you'll be behind in all the buildings and the lands. And the Europeans will just be able to generate more money, have better advisors, and keep ahead of you in tech. So you really have to get not only your tech, monarch points, and income set up, and then you can think about wars. If you've got a strong enough navy, that can also work as a deterrent. Won't work on England, probably won't work on Spain, will work on Portugal, sometimes on France. Those are two fairly good strategies. At some point, the other Native Americans will essentially westernize, reform, and they'll become a threat. But if you're ahead of them and you've actually colonized land, you should easily be able to swallow them up. They tend not to do really that well, in all honesty. So in my experience, it's actually not hard to survive as a Native American country. What is very difficult is to still remain a great power after the arrival of the Europeans, because if you fall behind, they're just going to keep attacking you and attacking you and attacking you. Most Native American games are lost by the time the Europeans arrive. Because if you're not in a good enough position when the Europeans arrive, you're doomed. Pretty much. A fair development size is a bit tough to ballpark. I would say it's at least over 100, somewhere between 100, 200. If you're lucky, you get over 200. If you're the Aztec or the Inca, that's really easy to do, actually. But obviously, the separate video stuff. North America, I tend to find the safest place tends to be located in this area, the Cherokee, Cree, Shawnee region. The Europeans tend to start colonizing up here because of colonial range, down in Florida from the Caribbean, and usually up here in Massachusetts region or down in Roanoke. That might just be historical AIs. I'm not entirely sure because historically that's kind of the way it worked, give or take. But once you get on a roll, if you win one war against the Europeans, you'll win more. They never tend to get huge power spikes and come after you again. The only thing you got to worry about is if you fall behind in tech, specifically that level 15 Militech. If they hit that, you could get a chain of war declarations. Like Spain attacks you, you're losing, then England will attack, then France will attack, then Portugal will attack. Those are things to watch out for. If you think that's coming, you want to surrender immediately, even if it means losing land. The land you lose will be converted to usually Catholicism or Protestantism, but it'd still be of your culture usually. So there's an easier chance for you to take it back. There's chances of rebellion. Tends not to happen, tends not to be that successful, but it's land that you'll get back really easily because it's already your core. So once you take it, you'll get an even bigger benefit. Running away from the Europeans colonizing is a somewhat legitimate strategy, but at some point you have to stand your ground and drive them back. Let's see, other major things to think about. If you can get a royal marriage, that's pretty good because that tends to mean they won't attack you. A really good thing if you have it is your diplomacy interface. Threatening countries is a really good one, especially for the Europeans because they'll 99% of the time be the thing that's threatening you. So you'll have an automatic diplomat dealing with them. Of course, watch out for the fact that there is a travel time on diplomacy between the New World and the Old World. So if they declare war on you and all your diplomats are in the New World, it will take them like half a year to return, which is really dangerous in the scheme of things. Other things, I don't really recommend building forts up here. You're going to have no real centers of population per se to defend other than your capital. You can, of course, if you wanted to create like a short wall up here or something, 2 forts to slow them down, but overall you're not going to be dealing with fort warfare. It's more going to be army warfare, in which case you want to hunt down their armies and destroy them. You don't want to let colonial nations grow too powerful, but the odds are if you're doing well, you'll always be stronger than the colonial nation. Of course, don't trust colonial nations to actually ever rebel. Liberty Desire seems a little broken for colonial nations these days. I think that's pretty much everything. Obviously, get morale advisors or discipline advisors when fighting them. Focus like defensive, better generals. Try and get them to attack you and then reinforce them. If they attack you on hills, you can easily reinforce and beat them. Specific nations that have really good military ideas. The Shawnee have some nice ones. I particularly am slightly fond of the Cherokee due to the war cost and the fact they get manpower later on, plus morale. The Iroquois aren't bad. The Huron, pretty much all the big name ones. The minor ones like Lenape and Susquehannock are not that useful in the scheme of things. I've never really played over in this region here. Mainly because this terrain is not really worth it. It's actually worth migrating your way over here. If you're going to play as a, this is a sort of a unique exception, the Pacific Northwest Native Americans, they actually have a slightly easier time of surviving than these guys because you can kind of hop, skip, and jump your way with colonists down the coast and meet the Europeans. The danger with that is by the time the Europeans arrive, their colonial nations... Sorry, by the time you meet the Europeans, where they arrive at your land, their colonial nations are already usually really set up and are hard to kill. Plus the Europeans at that point usually have an even bigger tech lead than you can easily make up. But they do have some pretty good ideas, plus they're rather isolated and you can easily have a large range of land. The issue is the AI doesn't realize that taking Alaskan land, for example, is not worth as much as like fighting your way through Mexico, and so they'll kind of go after you if you're weaker. In terms of fighting another player as a Native American, I really don't know because it really depends on the player, but sometimes you can buy them off, but most human players will know that Native Americans are really easy to kill early on if you do it right. And of course, if you're invading from Europe, just wipe them out before they can reform. They'll never be a threat to you. But I think that's it. So thank you guys all for watching. I know this is a not greatly into specifics guide to playing the minor Native Americans, but it's hard to, you really have to think about where you are in the world. They're not an easy start, but I won't say they're as hard as they used to be. The elimination of the westernization mechanic and the introduction of institutions makes it a lot easier for them to survive. I would say harder than any Europeans outside of, the Byzantines, Albania, the Teutonic Order, anyone who's going to die immediately. But a little bit harder than someone like England or France, give or take. There's some fun achievements, specifically Pueblo, Cities of Gold might be one of the easiest achievements in the game to get. That's not, royal marriage ones. So overall, they're fun nations. I will probably do a guide on the Aztec and the Inca, so look out for those because those have much more in-depth strategies. I'm pretty good as those guys. Obviously, this focused mostly on North America, but the lessons there can be applied to the South Americans. In fact, they have a slightly easier time because they meet Spain and Portugal earlier on. So hopefully this helped you guys. Any questions, comments, or just general, I'm in this situation, what do I do, help questions, please leave them in the comments. I'm more than happy to answer them. Thank you guys all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this and keep an eye out for my other guides. Bye for now.